While many Form.IO components offer unique settings specific to that component type, there are many settings that span across the majority of all components, which are referred to as general settings. This video will showcase all these settings and different ways they can be used. To configure the component settings, hover over a component within the form builder and click the gear icon. The settings window will also open up by default when a new component is added to the builder. The settings window is broken up into different categories, starting with the display settings. These display settings primarily relate to how the field or specific field elements will be represented to the end user interacting with them. The first setting label will be the name or the title representing the component on the form. By default, the label will be positioned at the top left of the component. This can be modified by changing the label position, which can be helpful when needing to save vertical space on the form or when designing a form with specific format requirements. When the right or left label position is selected, the label margin and width can be modified to fine-tune the label and component position. These values are based on the component span percentage on the form. The placeholder setting is text that will display when the field is empty. The setting can be utilized to give fields more description or helpful instruction to the end user. It can also be used as a label if the label is hidden on the component. The description setting will display text underneath the component and can be used to give the end user additional information about the field. The tooltip is a UI help bubble that displays next to the component label. This setting is especially helpful when longer description or instructions are needed for the field. HTML can also be applied to the tooltip to do things like emphasize text or create paragraphs within the tooltip. Use the prefix and suffix settings to add text or characters before or after the field to identify the field for things like currency or percentages. The custom CSS class allows you to apply unique CSS styling and formatting to your fields by utilizing the default Bootstrap CSS framework library. You can configure the field to have different label backgrounds or text colors, padding, and a lot more. So this field in particular has a different label background and text, as we can see up here. Some other examples of this: here's a HTML element that has a green background for an alert message. Here we've used the CSS class to float our fields to the left and the right. So a lot of stuff you can do with this. Configuring the tab index for components on the form gives complete control over the tab order for all components with the setting configured. So here we have the tab index set to 1, so this will be the first component in the index. Last name is set to 2, and then my address fields are set to 3, 4, 5, 6, and 7, and then I have my email and phone number fields. So if I scroll over to the form here, I can tab over, and you can see that tab index in effect there. The autocomplete setting will populate data from the cache of the user's browser. So if you have an email field on there and you want that to be populated by the email address a user has previously entered, you can leave this in the on, which is the default setting. If you want to disable this, you just set it to off. The hidden flag will hide the component on the front end of the form, but will remain present within the JSON schema of the form. This setting can be helpful when calculating data on the field that should not be visible to the front end user. Hide label will remove the label from the component, which can be useful when needing to save vertical space on the form. If your label is hidden, you can use things like a placeholder to give the component a title. Hide input applies a non-encrypted mask on the input data of the field, which can be useful for hiding sensitive data on the front end. When initial focus is configured, the cursor focus will be set to this component when the form is rendered. Only one component on the form should have this setting enabled. So if I save this and use the form, you're going to see the focus goes right to that component whenever I use and render the form. The disabled setting will prevent users from focusing inside the field and inputting data. You can use the disabled setting to prevent users from modifying calculation, logic, or populated values. In this example here, I have two fields and a total field that calculates the two fields' values. And then you can see I can't click in here or modify the total. When the table view setting is checked, the field and underlying submission data will be included with the submission data grid of the form. Data is still saved to the server regardless if the setting is checked or not. So this can be useful if you have a form with a lot of fields and you only want a select few to be visible on the submission grid within the data tab. So here I have 5 fields, but I only have the table view checked for last name, user ID, and email. So I shouldn't see first name and phone number in my submission grid. So I'm going to go ahead and make a submission. And when we go to the submission grid, we should only see the last name, user ID, and email. The modal edit setting turns the input field into a button that when clicked will open a modal window containing the field. This setting can also be applied to layout components that have a multitude of fields inside of it, so that when you click the layout, it'll display all of those components inside the modal. That wraps up all of the display settings. Make sure and tune into the other videos for information on the data and validation settings.